The torches of the Palatine Hill burned low as the night wind stirred the curtains of the imperial palace. Somewhere behind those gilded doors, a whisper was spreading, the kind of whisper that could destroy empires. Messalina. Her name carried the scent of jasmine and danger, of silk and blood. She was not simply a wife or a queen, she was the storm at the heart of the Roman Empire. Born into nobility, Valeria Messalina had been destined for privilege. She was intelligent, strikingly beautiful, and trained from childhood to charm, but charm was only the mask she wore. Behind it lived a mind sharpened by ambition and a heart that pulsed with hunger for control. When she married Emperor Claudius, few imagined that the quiet young woman beside him would become Rome's most feared empress. Claudius was a scholar, a man of words and order. He studied laws, built aqueducts, and dreamed of stability. Messalina, however, dreamed of conquest, not of lands or armies, but of hearts and influence. She learned quickly that in Rome, power was not written in law, it was written in desire, and she had mastered both. By the time she turned 20, her influence reached every corner of the empire. Ministers bowed before her smile. Senators altered laws to please her. Even generals feared her displeasure. When Claudius travelled or grew ill, Messalina ruled as though she had always worn the crown. She was adored, feared, and hated in equal measure, and she relished it. Yet power has a taste that grows sweeter with danger, and Messalina, restless within her palace, began to crave something darker than authority. In the gardens of the Domus Transitoria, surrounded by marble fountains and peacocks draped in gold, Messalina hosted feasts that would become legend. The air was thick with perfume and sin. Senators reclined beside courtesans, musicians played beneath painted ceilings, and wine flowed like rivers. But amidst the laughter and decadence, one thing was clear. Every man there, no matter his title, belonged to her. She seduced not for pleasure, but for leverage. Every affair was a bargain. Every secret she learned was a weapon. Her beauty was her army, her silence her sword. And with each conquest, she grew bolder. But even Rome, a city built on excess, began to whisper. Poets muttered her name in taverns. Slaves carried gossip through the markets. And the people wondered if the empress was truly untouchable. Then came Gaius Silius, the most handsome man in Rome. His face was known, his lineage noble, his ambition barely hidden. When Messalina saw him, she saw not a lover, but an opportunity. Silius had power, popularity, and the kind of courage that matched her own. She summoned him one evening, and what began as conversation soon became conspiracy. At first he hesitated. He knew the risk. To love the emperor's wife was death. But Messalina did not ask. She commanded. And no man in Rome could resist her command for long. Their affair became a secret only in name. They met in broad daylight, feasted in public, and walked through the gardens as if they already ruled together. It was a fantasy of dominance, and it intoxicated them both. Claudius, distracted by matters of state and his own naivety, saw nothing, or refused to see. But Messalina's hunger was growing. Her life with Claudius, once tolerable, became a cage. Silius began to whisper of marriage, of seizing power, of overthrowing the emperor himself. Whether she loved him or merely loved the danger, no one could say, but she agreed. What happened next would echo through history. On a sunlit afternoon with witnesses and priests in attendance, the Empress of Rome, wife of the living emperor, married another man. It was not rumour. It was real. The vows were spoken, the garlands exchanged, and the city gasped in disbelief. For a single breath in time, Messalina and Silius ruled Rome in everything but name. They believed Claudius would never dare defy her, that his love, his weakness, his blindness would protect them. She believed herself untouchable, chosen by the gods. But Rome was a city of daggers and tongues, and even the walls had ears. One of Claudius's freedmen, the loyal Narcissus, uncovered the truth. Terrified of what would come if he stayed silent, he fled to the emperor's side and revealed the affair, the marriage, and the whispers of treason. Claudius listened in stunned disbelief. At first he laughed, certain it was slander, But as more witnesses came forward, the laughter died. His face turned ashen. The man who had loved her most now realized she had used him as a shield for her ambition. Messalina's dream began to crumble. Her allies fled, her servants vanished, and the lovers who had once sworn devotion turned their faces away. Silius, desperate, begged her to flee, but she refused. For the first time in her life, fear took hold. The order came swiftly. Guards were dispatched. The empire that had once knelt before her now hunted her like prey. In her villa outside the city, Messalina waited. The gardens that once rang with music now echoed with silence. She dressed in plain garments, her jewels abandoned, her hands trembling not from guilt, but from disbelief. She had ruled Rome. How could it all vanish so quickly? When news came that Silius had been executed, she broke. The woman who once commanded armies of lovers and legions of flatterers now had only her tears. But even in her fall, there was one last chance. Claudius hesitated to sign her death warrant. Even after everything, he could not bring himself to end her life. For a brief moment, the Empress might have lived. But Narcissus, knowing Rome would never be safe while she lived, took the choice from him. He sent word to the Praetorians. They found her in the gardens, kneeling beside a fountain, her reflection trembling in the water. She tried to speak, to plead, but the soldiers said nothing. They offered her the blade, hoping she would end her own story with dignity, but Messalina could not. The woman who had conquered men and nations found herself powerless at last. A soldier stepped forward, and the deed was done. When the news reached Claudius, he said only one sentence: "Do not speak of her again." And Rome obeyed. Her statues were pulled down, her name erased from the records, her memory sealed behind silence. But silence cannot kill legend. For centuries her story endured, told and retold by those both fascinated and horrified by her. To some she was the embodiment of corruption. To others, a woman who dared to wield the same power men had taken for granted. Her life became myth, her name synonymous with seduction and ruin. Messalina's story is not just one of scandal, but of empire itself, of how power corrupts, of how fear feeds on beauty, and how ambition devours even those who believe they command it. And though Rome buried her in shame, the world never truly forgot her. She remains, even now, the woman who dared to shock an empire built on sin. Dawn crept over Rome in pale gold, and with it came the sound of a rumour. Messalina was dead, but her ghost walked the marble halls of power as if she still ruled there. The courtiers spoke her name in whispers. The senators looked at one another with unease. The empress who had turned desire into an empire had fallen, yet her absence felt louder than her life. Claudius, weary and grey, sat in the imperial chambers, staring at the empty seat where she had once reclined beside him. The echoes of her laughter seemed to linger against the cold stone. He had ordered her name forbidden, her statues destroyed, her likeness erased from every corner of Rome. Yet no decree could unwrite her, no fire could burn away memory. In the streets, people pretended to rejoice at her downfall. They spoke of justice and virtue, of Rome cleansed of sin. But behind closed doors, in the taverns and villas, her legend was already beginning to grow. Some called her a monster, a woman who defied gods and men alike. Others, in quiet admiration, called her brave, a queen who dared to seize what the world never meant her to touch. Messalina had lived as a scandal, but she died as a symbol. Her downfall had not merely been the punishment of lust, as the historians like to claim. It was the revenge of a system terrified by the power of a woman who refused to be silent. In a city where emperors could murder without consequence, her true sin had been living too loudly. The palace tried to cleanse itself of her memory. Her jewels were taken, her chambers sealed, her name scratched from every inscription. But the slaves who once served her still remembered. The courtesans whispered her stories to new lovers, and the poets, despite the emperor's commands, could not resist immortalizing her in secret verses. In time, those verses would travel beyond Rome. They would paint her as a seductress, a temptress, a warning to women, and a fantasy to men. History turned her into a mirror, reflecting not who she truly was, but what Rome feared she might have been. Claudius remarried, as emperors always did, but none of his new wives ever spoke above a whisper. The empire that had once danced to Messalina's laughter now walked on eggshells. Fear had taken the throne she left behind. But in the darker corners of the city, in the places where stories never die, her legend continued to evolve. Some said she had not died at all, that she had bribed the guards and fled into the countryside, living under a false name. Others swore that her spirit haunted the gardens where she was killed, a white figure drifting through the moonlight, still searching for the crown she lost. What no one could deny was that she had changed Rome. After Messalina, no empress would ever be truly free again. The court would tighten, the eyes would multiply, and even the most powerful women would live behind invisible walls. Her life had been a lesson written in gold and blood, that a woman's ambition could shake an empire to its core. Historians would later argue whether her deeds were real or exaggerated. They would claim her enemies. Men like Narcissus and the historians loyal to Claudius had painted her darker than she truly was. Perhaps the stories of her feasts, her affairs, her corruption were only half-truths, magnified by hatred. Perhaps Messalina was not the monster they described, but the scapegoat they needed. Because in Rome every tragedy required a villain, and it was easier to destroy a woman's reputation than to confront the truth of her power. Tacitus would write of her with disdain. Juvenal would mock her. Suetonius would turn her life into a warning. Yet all of them, even in their contempt, could not look away. Messalina had become something greater than their judgments. She had become unforgettable. And isn't that the truest form of victory? The empire she left behind continued to rise and fall. Emperors came and went, but her story survived. From dusty scrolls to whispered legends, she lived on in the collective imagination of Rome. Her face appeared on stage plays, her name in scandalous poems, her shadow in every tale of forbidden desire. Time transformed her from a sinner into a symbol of power, of defiance, of the unrelenting cost of being a woman who refused to bow. Messalina's story is not merely one of seduction or betrayal. It is the story of Rome itself, its glittering excess, its boundless ambition, its eternal hunger for spectacle. Through her, we see the truth that empires are built as much on lust and fear as on courage and law. When you look at her life stripped of the rumours and moral judgments, you see a woman who understood the world she lived in better than anyone else. She knew that men ruled through war and politics, but women ruled through perception, through influence, persuasion, and control of desire. And she played that game with unmatched skill until the day it consumed her. Perhaps the poets were wrong to call her wicked. Perhaps she was simply human, born into a world that demanded perfection and punished power. And in the end, when history tried to erase her, it failed. Because her story still burns, not as a lesson of shame, but as a reminder of how fragile the line between power and destruction truly is. If the story of Empress Messalina made you think of how ambition, beauty, and danger can collide to shape the course of history, then subscribe to the channel and like this video, because the past is filled with figures like her, too scandalous for their time, too powerful to be forgotten. And in their rise and fall, we find the truth of humanity itself, that every empire's heart beats not with gold or glory, but with the fire of those who dared to want more.